Elena sat on a flattened cardboard box, her back against the graffiti-covered pillar of the Kennedy Expressway overpass. At 32, her face held the weary geography of a woman who had lived 3 lifetimes in the last 2 years. Once, she had a desk job in a quiet suburb of Ohio, a husband, and a sense of permanence. Now, her world was measured in blocks, hours of daylight, and the weight of the thin sleeping bag she kept tucked beneath her. The city hummed above her, a rhythmic thud of tires on expansion joints, while below the shadows grew long and predatory. Elena wasn't like the others in the tent city a few blocks over. She stayed on the fringes, a ghost in a faded parka, preferring the isolation of this specific underpass. It was loud, but it was predictable. She watched the commuters in their glowing glass skyscrapers across the river, imagining their lives. Warm dinners, thermostats set to 72 degrees, and the luxury of silence. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting the city in a bruised purple hue, Elena began her nightly ritual of securing her meager belongings. That was when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the city's industrial symphony. It wasn't the hiss of air brakes or the shout of a passerby. It was a rhythmic, frantic sobbing. Elena froze. On the streets, noise usually meant trouble. She peered around the concrete pillar, her eyes adjusting to the dim, orange glow of the street lamps. About 20 yards away, near a pile of discarded pallets, sat a small figure. It was a girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, wearing a bright pink fleece jacket that looked like a neon sign against the grey grime of the alley. She was clutching a stuffed rabbit, her shoulders shaking with every gasp of cold air. "Hey!" Elena called out softly, her voice raspy from disuse. She didn't want to startle the child. "Hey, little one. You're okay?" The girl looked up, her face tear-streaked and pale. Her eyes were wide with a primal sort of terror. She didn't run, but she shrunk back into the shadows. Elena kept her distance, kneeling on the cold ground to appear smaller. "I'm Eleanor," she said, offering a small, tired smile. "I live here. Are you lost?" The girl nodded slowly, a hiccup escaping her. I was with my nanny. We were at the park, and then there were dogs, and I ran, and I can't find the car." Elena felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the wind. A child this clean, this well-dressed, lost in this part of town as night fell. It was a recipe for a tragedy the local news would feast on. She looked around, expecting to see a frantic parent or a police cruiser with flashing lights. There was nothing but the indifferent roar of the city. "What's your name?" Elena asked, moving an inch closer. "Maya," the girl whispered. "Well, Maya, it's getting very cold," Elena said, her mind racing. "You can't stay out here in the open. Why don't you come sit on my porch for a minute? I have a blanket and we'll figure out how to get you home." Elena knew the risks. A homeless woman found with a rich child could be accused of kidnapping in a heartbeat. But she also knew what happened to small, vulnerable things left alone in these shadows. She chose the risk of being misunderstood over the certainty of Maya being hurt. As the girl tentatively stood up and walked toward the cardboard sanctuary, Eleanor realized this wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a responsibility she wasn't sure she was strong enough to carry. Maya sat huddled on Eleanor's cardboard pallet, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of wood smoke and old rain. The girl looked like an alien inhabitant in this world of soot and steel. Elena watched her, noting the high quality of her boots and the delicate gold necklace around her neck. This was a child of the Gold Coast, the elite strip of Chicago, where the elevators opened directly into penthouses. "My mom is going to be so mad," Maya whispered, clutching her rabbit. "She won't be mad that you got lost, Maya. She'll be happy when she finds you," Elena replied, though she knew the reality was likely more chaotic. By now, the police were probably swarming the park 5 miles away. "Do you know her phone number?" Maya shook her head. "I know it starts with 312, but I forgot the rest. My nanny usually has the phone." Elena reached into her own pocket and pulled out her burner phone. It was an old model with a cracked screen and only 3 minutes of airtime left. She had been saving those minutes to call a social worker about a housing voucher, but she didn't hesitate. She tried to dial 911, but the no service icon mocked her. The high concrete walls and the interference from the expressway above created a dead zone. "We have to move," Elena muttered to herself. Just as she stood up to lead Maya toward a more populated area where she might find a working payphone or a beat cop, a group of figures appeared at the mouth of the underpass. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. It was Twitch and two of his associates. They weren't just homeless. They were predators who preyed on the weak within their own community. "What you got there, Eleanor?" Twitch asked, his voice a greasy sneer. He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto Maya's pink jacket and the glint of gold at her throat. "Found yourself a little prize?" Eleanor stepped in front of Maya, her posture changing instantly. The softness was gone, replaced by the jagged edge of survival. She reached into her waistband and pulled out a heavy metal tool, a large wrench she had found weeks ago. She didn't wave it, but she held it firmly. "She's my niece, Twitch," Elena lied, her voice steady and dangerous. "And if you take one more step, I'm going to make sure you never walk straight again. Move along, now." The men laughed, but they stopped. They knew Elena was desperate, and a desperate woman with nothing to lose was a dangerous opponent. They lingered for a moment, their eyes darting between Elena's weapon and the girl's expensive gear, weighing the risk. "Just being friendly," Twitch spat, turning away. "See you around, Princess." Elena didn't breathe until they were out of sight. She turned to Maya, who was trembling violently. "We can't stay here," Elena said. "They'll come back with more people. We need to go toward the light, toward the shops on Michigan Avenue. Can you walk? We have to be very quiet." Maya nodded, grabbing Elena's hand. Her small, warm fingers felt like a brand against Elena's calloused palm. For the first time in 2 years, Elena felt like she had a purpose beyond finding her next meal. She wasn't just a woman on the street, she was a shield. Together they stepped out from under the bridge and into the biting wind, two unlikely companions, navigating a city that felt more like a labyrinth than a home. The journey through the industrial outskirts toward the city center felt like crossing a war zone. Elena kept them to the shadows, avoiding the main thoroughfares where groups of loiterers gathered. She knew the geography of the hidden city, the alleys that were dead ends, the loading docks with motion sensor lights, and the security guards who were prone to using their boots instead of their voices. "Are we almost there?" Maya asked, her voice small. Her pace was slowing. The heavy winter boots she wore were designed for fashion, not a 3-mile trek through urban terrain. "A little further, honey," Elena encouraged. She looked down at the girl. Maya's face was smudged with dirt, and her eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "Tell me about your mom. What does she do?" "She works a lot," Maya said, trying to keep her spirits up. "She's the boss of a big company. She says she makes sure the numbers are happy, but she always reads to me before bed, even if it's really late." Elena smiled sadly. She remembered that life, the balance of career and home. She hadn't been a CFO, but she had been someone. Looking at Maya, she saw the ghost of the daughter she never had. The tragedy of Eleanor's life wasn't just the loss of her home. It was the loss of her identity as a caregiver. They reached a gas station, the first sign of civilization with bright lights. Elena felt a surge of hope. "Stay here behind this dumpster," she whispered to Maya. "I'm going to go inside and ask to use the phone. If anyone sees us together, they might call the police before I can explain, and I don't want them taking you away until I know you're safe." Elena walked toward the glass doors. She caught her reflection in the window and flinched. She looked exactly like what she was, a vagrant. Her hair was matted, her skin gray from the cold, and her clothes were a patchwork of charity bin finds. She walked inside, the warmth of the store hitting her like a physical blow. The clerk, a young man with headphones, looked up and immediately scowled. "No loitering. Out," he said, not even looking her in the eye. "Please," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "I just need to make one call. There's a child—" "I've heard it all, lady. Get out before I call the cops on you." "Call them!" Elena shouted, desperation breaking through. "Call the cops. That's what I want." The clerk reached under the counter, but not for a phone. He pulled out a heavy flashlight. "Get out now!" Elena backed away, her heart sinking. She couldn't risk getting arrested and leaving Maya alone outside. She retreated back to the shadows where Maya was waiting. The girl looked up expectantly. "The phone was broken," Elena lied, her chest aching. "We have to keep moving. There's a police station about 10 blocks from here. We'll go there." But as they turned the corner, the weather shifted. The wind intensified, and a thick, wet snow began to fall, swirling into a whiteout that erased the skyscrapers from view. The windy city was living up to its name, and the temperature was plummeting. They weren't going to make 10 blocks. They needed shelter, and they needed it now. The snow was becoming a shroud. Elena knew the dangers of hypothermia. It starts with a shiver and ends with a sleep you don't wake up from. She looked at Maya, who was now leaning heavily against her. The girl's lips were starting to take on a bluish tint. "Maya, look at me," Elena said, kneeling and rubbing the girl's arms vigorously. "We're going to play a game. We're going to find a castle to hide in. See that building?" She pointed to the Orpheum, an old vaudeville theatre that had been boarded up for a decade. It was a crumbling relic of a grander era, its marquee now missing half its letters. Elena knew the side entrance had a loose plywood panel. She had slept there once during a summer thunderstorm. They struggled across the street, battling the gusts. Elena pried the plywood back with a groan of straining wood, ushering Maya into the pitch-black interior. The air inside was stale and smelled of dust and rotting velvet, but it was still. It was dry. Elena pulled a small flashlight from her pocket, her most prized possession. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of tattered red seats and a grand staircase that led to nowhere. They made their way to the manager's office, a small room tucked behind the ticket booth. It was cramped, but the thick walls would hold the heat better than the open auditorium. "Sit," Elena commanded, piling every bit of fabric she had, her extra sweater, her scarf, and the wool blanket, around Maya. "I'm scared, Elena," Maya whispered. The grandeur of the theatre felt haunted in the dark. "I know, but I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Elena sat beside her, pulling the girl into her lap. She began to tell a story, not about the streets, but about a magical kingdom where the walls were made of chocolate, and the sun never set. She used her imagination as a shield against the reality of their situation. As Maya finally drifted into a fitful sleep, Elena stayed awake. She watched the door, the wrench tight in her hand. Her own body was racked with tremors from the cold, but she refused to let her own shivering wake the child. She thought about Maya's mother, the CFO. In that woman's world, $1 million was a statistic. In Elena's world, a dry room and a piece of cardboard were a fortune. She looked at the girl's face, peaceful in sleep despite the grime. Elena felt a strange sense of peace. For one night, she wasn't the homeless woman the world ignored. She was a guardian. She was essential. She looked up at the ceiling, watching the dust motes dance in her flashlight beam, and prayed for the morning to come quickly. She didn't know that blocks away, the most intense manhunt in Chicago's history was underway, and her face, captured on the gas station's grainy security footage, was being broadcast as a person of interest in a kidnapping. The first rays of dawn filtered through the grime-streaked transom windows of the Orpheum, casting long, dusty fingers across the floor. Elena's body was a map of pain. Her joints were frozen in place, and her head throbbed from the cold. But as she looked down at Maya, still tucked under the layers of blankets, she felt a surge of relief. The girl's breathing was steady. Her color had returned. Elena gently shook her. "Maya, wake up. It's morning. We have to go." Maya blinked, her eyes unfocused for a moment before the memory of the previous night flooded back. "Is my mum here?" "Not yet, but we're going to find her," Elena said. She helped Maya stand and tried to brush some of the dust off her pink jacket. They looked like two survivors of a shipwreck. As they stepped out of the theatre and back onto the street, the city felt different. The snow had stopped, leaving a thin white glaze over everything. The morning rush hour was beginning, and the sound of sirens was constant in the distance. Elena steered Maya toward a small diner on the corner. She knew she looked terrible, but she had $2 tucked in her shoe, enough for a cup of coffee and maybe a donut for the girl. She needed a moment of normalcy, a place where she could think. As they approached the diner, Elena noticed a newspaper rack. Her heart stopped. On the front page of the Chicago Tribune was a large photo of Maya, laughing in a sun-drenched garden. Above it, in bold black letters, "Missing, daughter of Luxem Global CFO, reward offered." Beside it was a smaller, blurrier image, a screen grab from the gas station. It was Elena, looking haggard and desperate. The headline below read, "Police seek woman in connection to disappearance." "Oh no," Elena breathed. "That's me." Maya pointed at the paper, her face lighting up. "And that's you, Elena. We're famous." "Maya, listen to me very carefully," Elena said, her voice trembling. "People think I took you. They think I'm a bad person. We need to find a police officer right now before things get worse." But the world moved faster than Elena. A man walking into the diner stopped, looked at the newspaper, then looked at Elena. His eyes widened. He didn't say a word. He just pulled out his phone and started typing. "Come on." Elena grabbed Maya's hand. "We have to run." "Why? You said the police are good." "They are, but they might not understand." Elena was panicked now. If she was caught by a frightened mob or a jumpy security guard, she might be hurt. Or worse, Maya might be caught in the crossfire. She headed for the one place she knew she could be seen clearly and safely. The plaza in front of the Federal Building, where the cameras were everywhere and the guards were professionals. The plaza was a wide, open expanse of granite, a brutalist monument to corporate power that felt like an Arctic tundra under the gray Chicago sky. In the center stood a massive red steel sculpture, a jagged abstract shape that offered no warmth and no place to hide. Elena and Maya ran across the open space, their breath coming in ragged gasps that turned into white plumes in the freezing air. Every step felt like a mile. Elena's boots, worn thin at the soles, slipped on the frost-slicked stone. "There!" Elena pointed to a pair of uniformed officers standing near the revolving glass doors of the Luxem Global Headquarters. "Go to them, Maya, run! They can keep you safe." But Maya didn't run. The bond formed in the shivering hours of the night was stronger than the fear of the unknown. She held onto Elena's hand even tighter, her small knuckles white with the effort. "Not without you. You're my friend. You're my queen. Please, Maya, just go." Elena's voice was a desperate rasp. She knew how the world saw her, a disheveled, frantic woman dragging a pristine child. To the police, she wasn't a savior. She was a threat. Behind them, the scream of tires echoed off the glass towers. A black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb, its tires smoking. Two men in dark suits jumped out, private security, their faces masks of professional aggression. They had been tracking Maya's GPS signal from her discarded smartwatch miles away, and they had finally closed the gap. "There she is! Get the kid!" one of them shouted, his hand hovering near the holster at his hip. The police officers at the door snapped into action. They saw the commotion, the shouting men, and the ragged woman holding the heiress. They drew their weapons with practiced, terrifying efficiency. "Police! Freeze! Put the child down and put your hands up, now!" The world seemed to slow down into a series of jagged, high-contrast images. The wind whipped Elena's matted hair across her face. She felt the weight of the heavy rusted wrench she had used to fend off predators in the night. It was still tucked into her waistband. She realized with a jolt of pure terror how it must look. A weapon. Slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, Elena let go of Maya's hand. She began to raise her arms, her fingers trembling. The cold bit into her exposed skin, but she didn't feel it. She only felt the crushing weight of the misunderstanding. "Don't hurt her." Maya screamed. The sound was high and piercing, a needle through the tension of the plaza. The little girl stepped in front of Elena, her tiny arms spread wide in a pathetic, heroic shield. "She saved me. She kept me warm. She fought the bad men. She's the queen of the castle." The officers hesitated, their fingers tightening on their triggers but not pulling. The private security guards slowed their approach, confused by the child's defense of her supposed kidnapper. At that moment, another vehicle, a sleek silver Mercedes, tore onto the plaza, ignoring the no parking signs and the curbs. The door flung open before the car had even fully stopped. A woman climbed out. She was dressed in a charcoal power suit that probably cost more than Elena's lost house, but her appearance was a wreck. Her hair was a chaotic mess, her makeup was smeared with salt trails of tears, and her eyes were bloodshot from a night of staring into the abyss. This was Sarah Sterling, the CFO of Luxem Global. In this light, she didn't look like a millionaire. She looked like a mother who had clawed her way back from the edge of a grave. "Maya!" she shrieked, a sound of pure, raw agony turning into relief. "Mommy!" Maya broke into a sprint, colliding with her mother in a tangle of pink fleece and charcoal wool. Sarah fell to her knees on the cold granite, sobbing into her daughter's hair, her hands frantically checking Maya's arms and legs for injuries, for marks, for anything that would break her heart further. The police slowly lowered their weapons, the tension in the air breaking like a snapped wire. Elena stood 10 feet away, her hands still raised, her face wet with tears she didn't realize she was shedding. She felt a strange, hollow mix of joy and profound emptiness. The adrenaline that had fueled her for 14 hours was evaporating, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Her job was done. The shield was no longer needed. The girl was back in the world of light, and Elena belonged to the shadows. She began to back away, her movements slow and ghost-like. She didn't want the reward. She didn't want the cameras that were surely coming. She just wanted to find a place where the wind didn't bite so hard and sleep for 1,000 years. "Wait!" Sarah's voice rang out across the plaza, sharp and clear. Elena stopped. Sarah stood up, still clutching Maya's hand as if the girl might vanish if she let go. She walked toward Elena. The police moved to intercept her, their protection instinct finally kicking in, but Sarah waved them off with a fierce aristocratic authority. She stopped inches from Elena. The contrast was staggering. The woman who had everything and the woman who had nothing, standing in the center of the city they both inhabited, but experienced so differently. "You're the woman from the video," Sarah said, her voice trembling with the weight of her gratitude. "I didn't hurt her," Elena said, her voice a broken whisper, her eyes downcast. I found her. It was so cold, and I didn't want her to be alone." Sarah Sterling looked at the woman before her. As a CFO, she was trained to see through facades, to analyze data and find the truth. She saw the matted hair, the dirt-stained skin, and the oversized, tattered coat that smelled of wood smoke and damp concrete. But she also looked at her daughter. Maya was clean, she was relatively warm, and most importantly, she was unafraid. She saw the way Maya looked at Elena with a gaze of pure, uncomplicated love, the kind of bond that can only be forged in the dark. "I know you didn't hurt her," Sarah said softly. Her voice had lost its corporate edge. It was just a woman speaking to a woman. She reached out, her perfectly manicured hand touching Elena's rough, chapped sleeve. "The police told me you were a suspect. They told me a transient had taken her, but Maya hasn't stopped talking about the queen of the castle who fought off the monsters." The police officers approached again, their heavy boots clicking on the stone. Their expressions had softened, replaced by a sheepish realization of their error. "Ma'am," one of them said to Sarah, "we need to take a statement at the precinct, and we'll need to process this person for the records." He reached for his handcuffs, not out of malice, but out of a robotic adherence to protocol for those without an address. "No," Sarah said. The word was a quiet explosion. "Ma'am, protocol dictates that in a missing persons case—" "I don't care about your protocol," Sarah snapped, the titan of industry returning with a sharp, icy edge that made the officers flinch. "This woman saved my daughter's life, while the rest of the city looked the other way. She's exhausted, she's freezing, and she is now under my protection. If you want a statement, you can come to my home in 3 hours. My legal team will be there to facilitate. Until then, she is with me." Elena felt dizzy. The tall glass buildings seemed to lean in, suffocating her with their height. I can't go with you," she stammered, looking at her filthy boots. "I don't belong in your car. I'll get the leather dirty. I'm not clean." Sarah looked at her $150,000 Mercedes, then back at Elena. She gave a small, sad smile that reached her eyes. "It's just a car, Elena. It's metal and hide. It can be washed, but a soul like yours, that's much harder to find in this city. Please, come with us." Sarah guided Elena toward the car. For the first time in 2 years, Elena felt the sensation of a luxury leather seat. It was heated, soft, and smelled of expensive jasmine perfume. As the car pulled away from the plaza, leaving the sirens and the onlookers behind, Elena looked out the window. She saw the distant silhouette of the underpass where she had slept just 24 hours ago. From this vantage point, in the warmth of the car, the place of her misery looked small and insignificant. Maya climbed into the back seat next to her, refusing to sit on the other side. She leaned her head against Elena's dirty coat and clutched her stuffed rabbit. "Are you hungry, Elena? We have the best pancakes at home. Maria makes them with extra chocolate chips." Elena couldn't answer. Her throat felt like it was filled with sand. She just nodded, the tears finally flowing freely, carving clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time since her mother's funeral and the loss of her apartment, the no-service icon in her heart had finally disappeared. She was being seen. She was being held. The Sterling estate in the Gold Coast wasn't just a house. It was a sanctuary of glass, limestone and light overlooking the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. As the heavy gates hummed shut behind them, the warmth of the home's climate control enveloped Elena. It was a sensation so intense it made her skin tingle and her lungs ache. She stood in the foyer, her breath catching. The floors were white Calacatta marble, polished to a mirror shine. Elena looked down and saw her damp grey prints, mud and Chicago slush, marring the perfection. She felt a deep ancestral sense of shame, an instinctual urge to turn around and apologize for her very existence. "Maria!" Sarah called out. A kind-faced woman in a neat domestic uniform appeared from the kitchen. She didn't recoil at the sight of the homeless woman. Instead, she looked at Maya, let out a sob of relief and crossed herself. "Prepare the guest suite on the second floor," Sarah instructed, her voice calm but firm. "And bring tea, the heavy wool blankets and the chicken soup. Elena needs to rest. She is our guest of honor." "Please," Elena whispered, pulling Sarah aside, her voice trembling. "You've done enough. I've seen her home. I should go now. I don't want to be a burden on your carpets or your time." Sarah took Eleanor's hands. She didn't flinch at the dirt under Eleanor's fingernails. "Eleanor, you stood in a sub-zero wind for 14 hours to keep my daughter safe. You used your own body to shield her. You are not a burden. You are the reason my heart is still beating tonight. Let us take care of you, just for today. Let the world be kind to you for once." Elena relented, her strength finally failing. She was led up a sweeping staircase to a bathroom that was larger than her entire living space under the bridge. There was a tub made of deep porcelain with fixtures of brushed gold. Maria had already filled it with steaming water and expensive lavender oils. When Elena stepped into the water, she cried. It wasn't just the heat, it was the dignity of it. She washed away the soot of the I-90 expressway, the grease of the diners where she'd begged for scraps, and the literal and metaphorical grime of 2 years of being invisible. When she emerged, wrapped in a plush white robe that felt like a cloud, she looked in the mirror. She saw a ghost. The hollows in her cheeks were still deep, the signs of malnutrition evident, but her eyes, once dull and defeated, were clear. She spent the afternoon in a fog of comfort. She ate thick chicken soup and sourdough bread, her stomach almost forgetting how to process real food. She spoke with the police again, but this time, with Sarah's high-powered attorney sitting beside her, the questioning was respectful. They realized quickly that the transient was actually a hero. Later that evening, Sarah entered the guest room. She found Elena standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the city lights. "I did some research," Sarah said quietly, holding a file. "I know about the accounting firm you worked for. I know it went under during the merger. And I know about the medical bills for your husband's cancer treatment. I know how the debt piled up until there was nothing left but the street." Elena turned, her face pale. "You looked me up." "I'm a CFO, Elena. I look everything up." Sarah smiled softly, a flicker of professional pride in her eyes. "But I didn't see a homeless woman in those files. I saw a brilliant professional who had a run of catastrophic luck. I saw a woman who stayed loyal to her family until the bank took the doors off the hinges." The house was finally quiet. The frantic energy of the rescue had settled into a peaceful hum. Maya was finally asleep, tucked into her silk sheets with a dozen stuffed animals, her hand still twitching in her sleep, as if reaching for Eleanor's coat. Eleanor and Sarah sat in the library, surrounded by thousands of books and a fire crackling in the hearth. Eleanor felt like she was in a dream, one she was terrified of waking up from. "The reward," Sarah began, leaning forward, "for the safe return of Maya was $500,000. The board of directors and I authorized it the moment the police declared it an abduction." Eleanor shook her head immediately, her pride flaring. "No, I didn't stay with her for a check. I didn't even know who she was until she told me her name was Sterling. I did it because she was a little girl who was scared, and I know what it's like to be scared. I won't take your money, Sarah." "I knew you'd say that," Sarah replied, a small smirk playing on her lips. "You have the stubbornness of someone who hasn't let the world break them. So I'm not going to give it to you as a reward. I'm going to give it to you as an investment." Elena frowned. "An investment in what?" "I have nothing but the clothes you just gave me." "An investment in you. And in the hundreds of other Elenas out there," Sarah said, her voice becoming passionate. "My company has been looking for a way to start a foundation for urban housing and job placement for years. We have the capital, but we don't have the heart. We have consultants who have never spent a night in the cold. We need someone who knows the reality of those streets." Sarah paused, letting the weight of the proposal sink in. "I want you to run it, Elena. I want to hire you as the executive director of the Sterling Vance Foundation. We'll provide the housing, the full medical coverage, and a competitive salary. You provide the vision. You tell us where the system is failing. You show us how to help people before they lose their names." Elena was stunned. Her heart raced. Sarah, I've been sleeping on cardboard for 700 days. I don't know if I remember how to be a professional. I don't know if I can sit in a boardroom." "You remembered how to be a human being when the world told you to be a predator," Sarah said, reaching across the table and grabbing Elena's hand. "The rest is just spreadsheets and meetings. I can teach you spreadsheets, but you can't teach someone how to have a soul. You already have the most important qualification." Elena looked into the fire. She thought about Twitch, the man who shared his crackers with her last winter. She thought about the women hiding in the shadows of the parks. "Why me?" Elena asked. "Because you're the only person I trust with my daughter's life," Sarah said simply. "And if I can trust you with that, I can trust you with anything." 1 year later, the morning air in Chicago was crisp, a biting wind coming off the lake, but Elena didn't mind the cold anymore. It was just weather now, not a death sentence. She stepped out of her apartment, a modest, sunlight-filled place in a refurbished, historic building, and hailed a taxi. She was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and tailored trousers, her hair cut in a stylish, professional bob. She carried a leather briefcase, but tucked inside a hidden velvet pocket. She still kept the small, rusted wrench from the underpass. It was her North Star, a reminder of the night that changed everything. The Sterling Vance Foundation had already helped 64 families transition from the streets into permanent, dignified housing. They didn't just hand out checks. They provided the shield Elena had provided for Maya: protection, legal advocacy, and a path back to humanity. The taxi dropped her off at the park near the Granite Plaza. Today, a new community center was being dedicated, a place where the invisible could go to find resources without judgment. "Elena!" a voice called out. A taller, vibrant Maya came running toward her, her pink jacket replaced by a school blazer, but her smile was the same. She threw her arms around Elena's waist. Sarah followed behind, looking rested, her eyes bright. They were no longer just a millionaire and a homeless woman. They were partners. They were family. "Are you ready for the speech?" Sarah asked, adjusting Elena's lapel. Elena looked at the crowd. She saw city officials and wealthy donors in the front rows. But she also saw the people in the back, the ones in the worn coats, the ones with the tired eyes. She made eye contact with a woman holding a small child, and she nodded, a silent promise. "I see you." "I am," Elena said. She walked up to the podium. She didn't talk about quarterly earnings or overhead. She talked about the night under the I-90 expressway. She talked about the sound of a child crying in the dark and how a shared blanket can be more valuable than a gold bar. We often think that to change the world, we need to be millionaires or heroes, Elena told the crowd, her voice clear and resonant, echoing off the glass towers. But the truth is, all it takes is one night of being a guardian. It takes looking at someone the world has discarded and deciding that they are worth the warmth of your own coat. As the applause erupted, Elena looked up at the Chicago skyline. The glass towers were still there, but they didn't feel like a different world anymore. They were part of her world, and she was part of theirs. That evening, as Elena walked home, she passed a familiar underpass. She saw a man sitting on a crate, his shoulders hunched against the wind. She didn't keep walking. She didn't look away. She stopped, reached into her bag, and pulled out a warm meal and a card with her direct office number. "My name is Eleanor," she said, kneeling on the cold ground so she was at eye level with him. "I live nearby, and I think I can help you find your way home." The man looked up, his eyes widening as he realized he was being seen, and in that moment the cycle of protection continued, proving that while the city may be built of steel and stone, it is the human heart that keeps it from freezing over.